Okay, we're starting recording. So good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this webinar on the low carbon public procurement report developed by UNEP in the framework of the Asia Pacific GPP Network, which is supported by KEITI. We believe that the potential impact of GPP in the mitigation of climate change is clearly underestimated, and we've been active in promoting the contribution of public procurement to the achievement of the Paris objectives. For example, at COP21, we started a few years back this drive and this promotion of public procurement towards climate mitigation. So already in 2015, we developed with our colleagues, with our Korean colleagues and other organizations, the Seoul Declaration, which was adopted in November 2015 in Seoul and was presented at COP21. At COP25 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we also organized a side event on net zero carbon through public procurement, which regrouped a number of countries that presented their experience in this area. For example, we had Norway, we had Korea, we had the US, we had Egypt present their the way they channel and they leverage public procurement to make it an effective tool in climate mitigation and adaptation. Today we will present you the initial findings of our report, which is being drafted by Ms. Jellie Molino. The objectives of the report are to present the current state of low carbon public procurement in the Asia Pacific region. We also try to identify common challenges and opportunities in low carbon public procurement policy development and implementation. We want to highlight also both regional and global LCPP best practices and provide an understanding of how low carbon criteria may be introduced and or integrated into every stage of the public procurement cycle. Major objective also is to make sure that public procurement and sustainable public procurement is introduced in nationally determined contributions that are developed by countries on a regular basis and provide the work plan that is adopted by countries to fight climate change. So without further ado, I will hand over to Ms. Molino to present us the report and its initial conclusions. This is also a training event, so we will have longer opportunities of interaction as in regular webinars. So, Jellie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Farid. So allow me to share my screen. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Jellie.
Okay. So again, good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be. And thank you, Farid, and also to the members of the Asia Pacific GPP Network who are present today. So for this
Sorry,
session,
Jellie, maybe you can present in use the presenter mode.
Oh, okay.
Okay, good.
Is it now?
Yeah, very good.
Okay, wait. Is it in present? Okay. Oh, wait. I couldn't find it. I lost it. I'm sorry. This is the problem if you are not a very techy person. So you can see the slides. It's okay. Okay. So again, for this session, is it moving?
Sorry, you're not in presenter mode. You're back to another mode.
Okay. Wait, let me try to.
It was fine, but then you changed something. Yeah, the early mode was right one.
Is it okay?
Now it's fine, yeah. Thanks.
Okay. So For this session, I will be presenting the initial assessment of our ongoing research on local procurement policies and practices in the Asia-Pacific region. Of course, I will share first the objectives and the methodologies that we are adapting, including, of course, the targeted countries, and some important information on where we stand as a region in terms of emissions, and what would drive us to strategically use public procurement in mitigating at least the impacts of climate change. And then, of course, I will give at the end an overview on how we could integrate low carbon criteria in the public procurement cycle. So as already discussed by Farid, the main objectives of this study is to present the status of LCPP in targeted countries. But it's important for us first to understand that the Paris Agreement recognizes the important role of sustainable patterns and consumptions. In fact, in addressing climate change, in fact, even the Sustainable Development Goals is very clear, specifically in Target 12.7.1, that it calls for sustainable public procurement. And as the largest spender in the market, which is, of course, us working in public procurement, which is equivalent to 13 trillion US dollar out of the global GDP, it is we can leverage on our purchasing power to advance key policy objectives, which is, of course, including protection of the environment through green public procurement. And we all know that from green public procurement, the idea of low carbon procurement has already emerged. In fact, even in Asia, in Southeast Asia, more particularly in Korea, there are so many government agencies that have already encouraged the use of public procurement to purchase eco-friendly products, and even mandated government agencies to track the record of their sustainable procurement. So we are going to present all of those assessment. Nonetheless, despite this particular potential, we reviewed the National Determined Contribution report that had been submitted by the 194 parties in the Paris Agreement, and only 10% of those reporting countries really identified public procurement as a strategic policy that they are using. And in Asia Pacific, it are only China and Vietnam have indicated in their reporting that they are actually considering and looking at the potential of procurement as their important instrument to achieve their targets. In fact, as early as 2015, UNEP, in partnership, of course, with KEITI, have already issued this sole declaration on mitigating climate change through low carbon procurement. So it is for these reasons that we are now assessing the status of low carbon procurement here in Asia Pacific, with the hope that we can actually use public procurement to advance the national direct contributions of countries. And then, of course, we have to identify the challenges and opportunities for more LCPP in our region. In terms of methodology, we try to expand as much as possible the methodology that we'll be using in this assessment. We conducted literature review. In fact, both peer-reviewed journal in terms of the legal assessment on public procurement, and even on the practical and the practice sides. In fact, we covered 132 peer-reviewed materials. And then we also look at online resources in terms of case studies, tools, reports, and we were able to gather 51 materials. We also conducted stakeholder interviews, so I'm hoping that some of those that participated in the interviews are present here right now. And then we prepared, of course, 15 country fact sheets highlighting what are the policies and practices of the targeted countries in terms of low carbon LCPP. And this particular webinar and training that we are going right now is actually part of the methodology. This is our stakeholder consultation work as well. I'll try my best to be on time so that at at the end of the presentation, we'll have more time for discussion because your inputs, comments will be very crucial in the finalization of this particular assessment. Of course, the limitation is that we focus only on 15 targeted countries, and we base them according to at least 3 major criteria. The first is whether or not they are a member of our network. And the second is if they participated in the 12.7 monitoring exercises of UNEP, and if they participated in the recently concluded 2022 SPP Global Review. So those are the 3 criteria on how we're going to limit the targeted countries. And that is where we were able to identify the 15 countries that are covered in this particular assessment. And before that, it is important for us to really understand where we stand as a region in terms of our emission. So one thing you can see in this particular data that is derived from the World Economic Data in terms of carbon emission. And also we try to look on the commitment of our targeted countries in terms of carbon reduction. You'll notice that our region has at least 2 of the important aspects on how we actually monitor the emission index. We have, of course, one of the least of the countries with the lowest in environmental impact in terms of carbon emission. Bhutan has the 100 index score. 100 means it has a lowest environmental impact. At the same time, we also have in our region the highest in terms of environmental impact, which is China with a score of 0. So if you will look, like our region has this particular, impact lowest and of course the highest. And then if you look at, although at least majority is still on the portion of 90 and above, which is very, very, very good in terms of environmental impact. It has the lowest impact. And you'll notice also the importance of knowing the carbon emission per individual per country. Because even if, for example, in this particular data, you'll notice that the country which has the lowest carbon emission per capita is Myanmar. So it is important, specifically when we interviewed some stakeholders. They are very they are highlighting the importance of the buy-in of the citizens. So in that case, important for us also to understand, like, what is my carbon emission contribution, because at the end of the day, that is also impacting the overall performance of our country. And then, of course, if you look at the updated nationally determined contributions, we can have as low as 5%. And most of the countries have this unconditional unconditional target, meaning that, we have a very low target because for us to be able to actually reduce our emissions, we need some technical assistance. So that's why our commitment usually depends on certain conditions, which includes, of course, financial support, technical support, specifically from countries that are considered to be the highest contributors of carbon emission. So in this case, the target reduction really depends on some condition, specifically that most of the countries here in our region are really considered as highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. So in this case, we also need to understand, yes, we've been looking on all of these mitigating effort on climate change impact, but in terms of public procurement, just recently, the World Economic Forum has computed the contribution of our field of specialization in terms of greenhouse gas emission. And accordingly, it is close to 15% of the annual greenhouse gas emissions. which is actually equivalent to that of the US, because the US annual contribution is 15%. So in this case, public procurement per se is responsible, to the global contribution equivalent to that of the US, which is also considered as one of the top 3 emitters in carbon emission. So imagine the impact that we could make if we are also considering the reduction of carbon emissions in our own procurement. So here you'll see in this map, if you have a light green, it means that you have the highest impact. We need to make sure that soon our region will all be as green as Bhutan. And of course, we have to understand where we stand, at least on the terms of what has been done in terms of promoting low carbon public procurement. It is for this reason that we actually look at literature as one of the methodologies. And as mentioned, out of those research materials that we have reviewed, we identify like what are the low carbon public procurement framework that has been used by other countries. And in fact, we categorize it into at least 4 framework, which is, of course, the same framework that we have been using in the Sustainable Public Procurement Global Review. And you will notice that at least in terms of the literature that we have reviewed, 53% of the framework that is being used to promote carbon emission criteria in public procurement is in the form of executive policies and programs. So it's an initiative of mostly the central or national government. And of course, this is followed by the state. So you'll see it's like the national government and local are those that are really doing some initiatives to promote low carbon public procurement. And the legislation of this particular framework, although increasing, is still not a par with what the executive, both from the national and the local departments, are doing. The problem with this particular initiative is we all know, if you look at the case of the US, if the framework supporting low carbon public procurement is only in terms of the executive, it is as good as the term of the president sitting. So that happened in the case of former President Trump, immediately, revoking the previously issued executive orders by those predecessors. So this is actually the one of the issues that on the legal perspective, is it really good that we rely solely on executive policies and programs? And of course, we try to map it based on the geographic coverage of this particular framework. And we have noticed that if you look here although this is not regional, because we try to as much as, the literature covers so much of that of the US alone. So we couldn't say that it is actually North America, because mostly just the US and Europe, and then of course Asia. But if you look at this particular graph, you'll notice that in the case of the Europe, there are more initiatives from the state, the member countries, of course. So there are many activities from the member countries. And then in the case of, again, also in Asia, most are also with the executive and very rarely on the legislative. The legislative only is observed in countries, OECD member countries in Asia. And you'll notice that only Europe has framework that is supported by judicial decisions. In fact, if you analyze the literature in terms of legal framework, the court in Europe has a big role, specifically if the European Court of Justice will issue a specific case law, then that will serve as an initiative for the European Commission to issue guide and for other countries to also comply. And of course, if you look at the terms of using carbon emission in terms of the year of the literature, And this is not really something new because as early as 1970, the US has been issuing executive orders on the important roles of public procurement to reduce our public procurement for energy efficiency. So from 1970, but at any rate, you'll notice that the problem, at least in how the assessment of the literature in terms of the US, is on the implementation. The implementation is really not as robust as that of Europe. So this is in terms of the literature. And then, of course, we also look at the different climate change law and policies. And then, of course, this is based on the Climate Law Organization. What they did is they actually, collated all of these laws and policies that are very specific to climate change. It is important for us to also understand this particular framework. Why? Because let's see, how do these people working on climate change see the importance of our field, public procurement, and the fight against climate change. And here, if you look at the climate laws and policies specifically, and of course, I get this data only to get from the Asia Pacific region. We look also, Japan is like an almost equivalent law, both from the executive and the legislative in terms of providing framework on the fight against climate change. But at any rate, I actually read them all and try to figure out. And then interestingly, of all of these 371 laws and policies, only Japan, Mongolia, and South Korea have a very specific laws and policies recognizing the important role of public procurement and the fight against climate change. For example, in Japan, they have this particular environment consideration and contract law, and there it was it was stipulated that in terms of contract law, the reduction of carbon emissions should be considered. In Mongolia, this is actually a policy. Of course, when you speak of policy, that's an executive order where they also recognize the role of public procurement. In the Philippines, as early as 2006, I was actually surprised that there was already an executive order issued by then President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo on the role of government procurement on the promotion of energy efficiency. So at least in terms of the national government. And then of course, South Korea has this very specific provision in its Carbon Neutral Act on how they could use public procurement, specifically mandating some criteria on greenhouse gas reduction and also promotion of energy efficiency criteria in their public procurement. So this is really very interesting that despite the robust climate change laws and policies, they have not yet, at least those working on this area, have not yet identified or recognized the very important role of our field. So we have a lot of work to do. And then, of course, we also look at the public procurement law. At least on our side, we are very, very active in promoting at least some sustainability clauses in the public procurement law. And as of this is like we try to evaluate using the standard that is being used right now by the World Bank global public procurement data on what should be the minimum sustainability clauses in a public procurement law. And that should be like a specific provision on total cost of ownership, life cycle costing, value for money, or the MIT clause, sustainability clause, even the award to SMEs and domestic preference. These are the last two are very important, specifically if you are looking on the potentiality of reducing carbon emission in terms of transportation. So it's like you're localizing some of your procurement because of the possibility of reducing the contribution of public procurement in carbon emission due to the transportation requirement. So that is one of the reasons it's also considered as a sustainability class in terms of environment. But of course, we all know, those of us working in sustainable procurement, that sustainability is not limited to the environment. It includes the 3 pillars of sustainable development. But at any
Sorry,
rate,
Jelly, we have a question here because we don't see the color code here.
you don't see the color code?
No, because it's below, I suppose.
Oh,
At the bottom of the slide, probably. Or you can just tell us, you know. You don't have
okay.
to. Just tell us, you know, what it means.
Okay, the slides will be shared anyway. So at any rate, if you will look at this, although sorry for that, if you can see the color coding here, what is crucial only is like, okay, let's think India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Mongolia. They have all of these clauses in their public procurement law. In Myanmar, only the domestic preference clause. They didn't have any, from total cost of ownership even to the award of SMEs. They didn't have any provision in their public procurement law, at least the one that is published in the global review. And then, of course, the other thing is that in terms of, for example, Bhutan doesn't have life cycle costing and sustainability clause, but they are more focused on total cost of ownership and value for money. And Cambodia didn't have life cycle and total cost of ownership, only value for money, meat, and of course, our only value for money and meat. They don't have also the provisions for
So
the
Jelly,
other.
it's clear that the green color means that there is existence of a
Yes,
clause. Orange that
yes.
it's not there. But
So
what
you
is
can see
blue?
now. The
No,
blue
I'm just
is that,
asking.
okay, the blue shows that they didn't have a specific clause on that, but you can actually look at some wording that may be interpreted. Let's say, for example, most economically advantageous standard. They didn't use that word, but they have provision of considering non-price criteria. They didn't have concept of value. They didn't mention the word value for money, but they will be considering economic and social conditions in terms of the evaluation criteria. They didn't have the word sustainability clause, but they have also provision for environmental protection. So those are the blues, meaning that the clause were not expressly, but if you navigate on some of the provision, you can actually interpret them to support those clauses.
Thank you, Doctor. That's very clear.
Okay, so let's now go on the policies and practices. Of course, we try to map them at least into 3 categories: the thematic policy supporting low carbon procurement, the use of eco-labeling, and of course, product categories with a very specific mentioning that greenhouse gas emission reduction should at least be calculated expressly or impliedly. So if you will look at all of the policies and practices here, we look at all of those regulations that and policies that have been published, including the climate law and law policies, public procurement policies, and practices in all of the reports that have been published, both literature, anything online, and even on the website of these particular countries. You'll notice that in this particular area, we have a lot of national thematic policies that can support low carbon public procurement. And in fact, a lot of them, except in the case of Cambodia and except in the case of Bhutan, however, Cambodia, they didn't have, at least on record, indicated that they have eco-labeling policies that is on record. So if there are people here on those countries, I would like to hear your notes on that. And of course, in terms of product categories with specific greenhouse gas reduction, We have China, India, Indonesia, and Korea, New Zealand, Philippines, and Singapore. So they have at least some product categories that are very specific that they are considering greenhouse gas emission. That is supported both by policies and they are actually practicing them. And of course, I want to share these stories because if you will notice back, they have problem with the law. They didn't have that much. And then, of course, in terms of policies and practices, they are not as robust as the other countries. But here we can learn good stories. Say, for example, in Bhutan, they have yet to develop their green building initiative in terms of public procurement, but they already have the anti-corruption building already is considered as one of their best story in terms of promoting the green building. So this is actually the picture at, I'm sorry, the picture at the back, at the bottom. That is the anti-corruption. When they are looking at it, they look at the potentiality of reduce using as much as sun as possible. So it's like they want to make sure that it's energy efficient. So they have the design considered the use of energy efficiency more on sun and solar, and even in the heating. That was the design. Although in this particular case, one of the challenges is really the high cost, because Bhutan is considered as an import-dependent country, specifically in terms of construction materials. And if they're going to look at construction materials that are promoting energy efficiency at that time, they would have to get it from India, and the costs were really very high, to the point that when they are actually, developing the design, they had this concept of hybrid. And the best practice that they did here is using their own adobe clay, which of course, based on their history, this is one of the most sustainable materials. So this particular building in Bhutan, the anti-corruption building, is an example of how they were able to do it, despite the fact that they don't have a very specific policy at the time on low carbon public procurement. And of course, this is not yet written in any of the materials that we have reviewed. And another one is, I want to highlight also the case of Cambodia. If you look at the previous slides, you'll notice that Cambodia doesn't even have all of these policies promoting low carbon public procurement. But in this case, they are now actually mandatory buying ozone-friendly refrigerators. The problem before is that they couldn't do it because the law is not supporting. But the other law is in terms of the market. Cambodia has issued the prohibition of the entry to their country of any refrigerators that has the CFC. So because of that particular law on the entry of these ozone depleting refrigerators, it becomes like the mandatory or the default product in the market. So the government is now buying it, not because, they have all of these low carbon or sustainable or green procurement policies, simply because the government prohibited the entry of ozone depleting refrigerators. So the market in itself is already promoting the ozone friendly ref. So the government is buying them. And then the other important story that I want to highlight is in terms of Sri Lanka. They don't have yet sustainable procurement, although I'm hoping, and based on some of the discussion, that they're about to approve their sustainable public procurement policy. I'm looking at the news. I haven't seen it. It was already approved, but say weeks from now, it will be approved by the government. But at any rate, even without that, they have this green building. They have this green building not because they have the policy, but because they have this green building certification. And there are private construction companies that are already certified as they're doing green building. So when they are participating in government procurement, they brought with them their green certification. So it's like the certification, the initiative to do green building comes from the private sector. So it's like they're saying, okay, since we're doing this green building already in our private uh, um, projects, we don't want to change our design and system when we do it in the government. So in that case, because there are already private companies doing green building in their private practice, they are not changing it when they're participating in the government. So you see, these are some of the stories that are happening in our region, yet not written, meaning that there are initiatives, and this particular study is to highlight this initiative and hopefully pave the way to support them to address some of their challenges. And what are these? Of course, again, it's still on the cost. So they are thinking that, you know, when government is considering, for example, low carbon, and they are doing the managing of their budget, they say they are expensive, and then thinking of their budget, so they couldn't, as much as they would want to, it is difficult to manage a budget and then eventually go for low carbon products. Because again, as mentioned, for example, low emission vehicles, it is not just a perception that they are costly, because they are due, according to our interview, they are really costly. So there is a problem in terms of managing the budget, and then making sure that they also try to incorporate carbon criteria in their procurement. And then of course, again, some of the challenges pertain again to capacity building. Capacity building in the sense that, you know, low carbon climate change is a technical field. So even I, on my doing PhD, I have to study the science on climate change to be able to explain to people working on climate change public procurement. So imagine if you're doing more public procurement, and then suddenly you will be asked to study another field. So they really have to understand the importance of low carbon and the science behind it. In fact, this is not just about low capacity in terms of those working on the government. Even the understanding of the supply side, in one of the stakeholders inputs was saying that, you know, even product manufacturers, they are not aware of the carbon footprint mechanism and how to calculate it. So it's like, you have to understand carbon amounts. How are you going to compute it? So these are science that even the supply side have yet to understand. And what more so on the part of the demand side. So at the end of the day, it's actually the cost that we have to address, or even if there are the budget, specifically in countries that are already considered as high income economy, they don't worry about the budget. The problem is that the options are not available as much as they would like to. Specifically, this happened during the pandemic when the supply chain was disrupted, and they realized that these options were not yet available in their country. And then, of course, when you talk about low carbon procurement, say, for example, vehicles, this is not just about, okay, there are vehicles. The issue is that when the government, for example, mandated that all government should procure electric vehicle, the problem is that you have to make sure that the infrastructure are there. And infrastructure is like an electric vehicle, you have to have charging station. So in this case, this is not just about the Ministry of Finance mandating, even the transportation sector has to make sure that the infrastructure is there. And then at the end of the day, of course, those countries that are still wanted to do more, even sustainable and green procurement, they are having this challenge of lack of legislation. And we have countries in our region that still need support to be able to address this particular problem. And countries have already received so many external support. But the challenge is that after the support, okay, you have launched, you have this GPP roadmap. What happened is that sustainability So there are countries that have been assisted even by UNEP, by multilateral development banks in the launching of their GPP roadmap. But after that, nothing happened. So it's like, but this is not only happening also in Asia. We try to review all the other countries. It's on the progress, and you see that there is really a problem on sustaining the launching. So these are some of the challenges provided by the stakeholder during our interview. At any rate, one thing good about all of us working in this particular field, and despite all of these challenges, we are very, optimistic. We are very optimistic. We are not giving up that this is something that we want to do. This is something that we're not just buying. We are strategic partner of our country. That's why when asked, like, if you can do anything to make sure that low carbon procurement will become a default in the future, these are some of the good let's say, suggestions or wish list. But at the end of the day, these are something that is being done already. For example, they say, there has to be a self-sustaining financial mechanism for GDP and eco-labeling. If you will notice in the problem of the costing, there are so many financial incentives right now. If you are an economic operator, providing environmentally friendly products, you can give a tax, let's say, tax rebate, or some of the financial assistance are already available. So there are countries that are providing financial and even tax exemption for those operators that are, addressing this so that the financial problem will be addressed. And then, of course, in terms of capacity building, this is UNEP has been doing it. We've been trying to reach people to make sure that they understand. If you are just participating in the 12.7.1, this is not just about monitoring. This is actually capacity building in terms of how we can address a particular barrier. And then, of course, the other thing is that how can we make the low carbon option as the same price or as attractive as the standard product? That's something we could do, hopefully, yes, because if you will look at the overall life cycle costing, and you have to understand that this is not just about the outright price, but at the end of the day, the total cost, we've been telling some of our networks, specifically in the government, how much budget do you have for addressing pollution? Why not put those budget, in terms of putting it in promoting a low carbon option? So this is just a matter of understanding budget and the impact on how we can really maximize the use of our very limited budget. And here, very interesting, the last is that we just hoping that we couldn't just buy things that damage the environment. And would that be possible? Instead, one thing I learned from a stakeholders interview is that she said before, who would think that we couldn't buy straw, single straw? Years ago, that is something we couldn't perceive, but right now it is something we couldn't buy, at least in some countries. So in that case, we can make a world in such a way that those things that are damaging the environment is something we couldn't buy. Cambodia did it in an example. We couldn't longer buy, and also depleting refrigerator. So that is something that is being done right now. And of course, there are so many other practices. I could name a lot. When we release this particular work, we have actually put them all so you can reference them once the final paper is released. But at any rate, these are just some of the national policies that is in best example. Why this was considered as best practices, at least for two reasons. First, it is mandatory. If you look at the challenge, there's no legislation. Sometimes, it requires a mandate to do it. They have to push the button and say, do it, and we will comply. So this is having a specific mandate to do it. And then not just mandate, but a target. Because if you have a particular mandate, but you don't have a target and a monitoring mechanism to make sure that your mandate and target are really achieved, then you will just have something like a dream, not necessarily an actionable work. So these particular practices actually highlight those three. There is a mandate, there is a target, and they are actually monitoring it. And just to give you some idea, we try to highlight how those countries are doing it in the actual practice. At least, how are they integrating low carbon criteria in the public procurement cycle? I try to put it in the simplest public procurement cycle, although we know that there are just so many ways by which we can expand the cycle. But just the simplest public procurement cycle, we can actually see how we can integrate low carbon criteria. First, in the planning. It is very important that you start from there. As mentioned, you must have a target. Some of the best examples is that they have this carbon reduction threshold. And then, of course, they identify the available technology, even the available alternative. One example is, for example, is the case of, reduction of greenhouse gas emission to procurement of e-vehicles. But some municipalities could not afford it. So instead of that, they decided to lessen the use of vehicle. So in terms of transportation, so they put it like, this is not want to contribute in the reduction of carbon emission, but not by procuring a vehicle, but by reducing the use of vehicle per se. So you see, so because you cannot afford, you try to find ways on not to make it a necessity to have a vehicle. So that could be your alternative if you have a problem with the budget. And then of course, in terms of solicitation, it is very important that you already defined your low carbon specification and award criteria. And most of the available practices right now is, of course, on the use of energy efficient goods and services. UNEP has published a lot of criteria on that. And then the other one is then the low carbon performance materials by requiring them to actually integrate in the product is how is this actually contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission. And in terms of another specification, if you don't have the particular idea yet, some countries are actually requiring the economic operators to provide them the solution. So this is how they are introducing low carbon criteria and the solicitation. And then when they go to contract management and utilization, it's very important that you should have low carbon clauses. And how are they doing it? Of course, as mentioned, you have to have indicators because sometimes, I work on the legal, we just put some clauses. But the problem is how are we going to make sure that these clauses are actually implemented? You don't just put protection of the environment, compliance with all of these laws, but you have to set KPIs. And it could be like, reducing transport emission and continuous improvement, allowing the economic operators to provide further suggestion. In fact, one of the most used contract clauses is what they call is like, okay, you provide the solution, and then whatever energy savings that solution that you are committing to have, you'll get that as your payment. So that is precisely some of the emerging contract clauses. And of course, there has to be penalties for non-compliance. And you have to also include, there are so many countries that they have this particular environmental criteria, and then these are mandatory in the private sector. Sadly, the public procurement office were not yet aware of it, and they are not actually the one implementing it. Sometimes, environmental monitoring board are even stricter on the private compliance and not on government contracting because of the lack of awareness in terms of this, how to integrate this standard in government contracting. And at the end of the day, some of the countries have already introduced what they called as carbon reduction plan from the very beginning of the planning, so that they would see that their particular procurement is really intended to mitigate the negative impact of climate change. So that's why they already have this target. And then when they are implementing the project, they are assessing the uh, uh, the target from the actual. And of course, from there, you'll see, are we achieving what we have set as a carbon reduction threshold? And that is very important. Otherwise, you'll have all of this criteria, but you are not sure on whether or not that is being accomplished. So that's it for the assessment that we have. But for purposes of our webinar right now, these are some of the questions that I would like to present to the group for discussion.
Can you go over the questions? You're muted, Jellie.
Okay, so I have three questions. I have three questions for all of the participants that are here right now. First is, how would you describe your agency's level of experience in introducing low carbon criteria in the public procurement process? Have you started, or just planning, or did not even think of it yet? And second is that, what do you think are the instruments that will drive you, because we are all buyers, where do we implement it, that would help us integrate this criteria in our procurement practices? And what do you think would encourage private sectors to voluntarily submit low carbon tenders, like in the case of Sri Lanka? They're not even required, to bring their best practices in the private construction, but they did it when they submit their bids in government contracting. So those are the three questions that I really want to get your insight, for purposes, of course, of improving further our assessment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Molino, and I think you deserve a round of applause for a very rich, very clear presentation. And now I'd like to ask the participants to raise their hand and contribute to the discussion or ask questions, clarifications. So the floor is open.
Yes, please. So if you have questions, insight.
Since we're a small number of participants, maybe I can ask you to introduce yourself and indicate, maybe provide some elements of responses to the questions posed by Jellie. I will go by alphabetical order. Hello, Shandima, good to have you in this training. We spoke a lot about Sri Lanka.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Dolly, for mentioning about Sri Lanka and our data and our findings about our country. Actually, it was very good interview we had with you. And as you mentioned, we are still in the very initial stage, and fortunately we could get the approval for the eco-labeling framework, but the green public procurement is still in the discussion in the cabinet of ministers. They considered it yesterday, so we are looking forward to have the decision about our policy. One thing I noted from your presentation, Ms. Jolie, it is regarding some clauses regarding in your Excel data sheet, as I remember, with the color codes. So I would like to know how you uh, got that information from your interview, or what is the source you could get that information.
Thank you
Yes, thank you.
for.
And I will ask
Hello?
Jellie also to stop sharing
Sorry.
her screen. Okay, thank
Hello?
you. Yes.
So can I reply
Did you
now?
hear the question, Jellie?
Yes, I can. Yes, okay,
Okay, please
okay.
go ahead.
So actually, as mentioned in the methodology, this is actually based on desk review. So I got all the copies of the
Okay.
public procurement law from the World Bank data on global public procurement
Okay.
database. So from there,
Yes,
I
because
read the provisions, but I verify. You know, if you look at the global
okay.
public procurement database, they already have like no, none yet. That's why I have their blue and
Okay.
and the red, because I read the data, the law,
Okay.
and I say, okay, you don't have this, but in this provision, this can be used to promote most economically. The word most economically is not mentioned, but the fact that
Yes.
there is provision considering non-price criteria, there is provision promoting socioeconomic,
Yes, actually,
that
because
is
I
considered
asked
there.
this because yeah, because still we have not many information regarding some background in the public procurement, and we expect to collect do the information survey next year. We are planning to do that. So this kind of information from your side also very much important. So we can consider about this information in our survey. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and it is very interesting presentation from you. Thank you, Mr. Ali and Mr. Farid.
Thank you to you. Now, and then I have Ding Ling in China. Any reaction? Any question? Then representative from the Environmental Management Center. No question. Gilbert Quaresma, can you introduce yourself and give us your feedback?
Hello.
Hello. Yes, Gilbert.
I'm sorry if noise in the background, but yeah. My name is David Cuesma. I am from the Government Procurement Policy Board at the Export Office of the Philippines. So,
Oh, there's.
in terms of question number one,
Can you put
there
your
was
question in writing or your comment,
a
because we can't hear you very well. I'm really sorry. Please put your comment or question in writing.
I'll just put in my inputs in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have then in consult.
This is Iqbal Sheikh from InConsult Pakistan. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, Molino. In Pakistan, actually, currently what we are doing is we are working on this particular interventions. We have carried out number of the consultation workshops and awareness workshop. And I hope the substance and the material that we got from your presentation, we're really going to make use of it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And just I take up the opportunity to tell you that the study will be released in January, and we'll have another opportunity, another webinar to present it in full. Myanmar, we spoke about your country. Can you introduce yourself? KNL, Myanmar. Okay. Manoj Didwania?
Yeah.
Hello? Yes, go ahead. Okay. Manoj, please. Sanjay? Hello, Sanjay. From India? Susan is on the call. Hello, Susan.
Are you talking to me, Fareed?
Yes, yes, yes. Please, can you introduce yourself? Give us your feedback.
I'm Susan Brown Shafi, and I'm sitting in on the call today from Geneva. I'm very interested in these issues, and I just keen to hear the voices from the stakeholders, the problems that they're having, because yeah, I think a lot of times that's voices we don't hear. So I don't take more time today beyond that.
Thank you. And which organization do you represent, or are you just?
Well, I'm with an academic organization at the moment, working with teaching public practitioners skills on evidence-informed policy making.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. And then Jing, China. Hello, Jing. Any feedback? Any clarifications, questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Farid, and thank you, Jelly. And I think her introduction very insightful and fruitful. And just last year, as CEC also held make us very initial in research also on the how low carbon or how GPP or how SPP integrate into the national NDC targets. So I think I need to learn from this report and also make some reference in the next step, because so far the government, not only the government but also the procurer have the awareness, should do some efforts to integrate the procurement to achieve the national targets of climate change, but still, and also there have energy saving in products and energy efficiency products and also environmental labeling products are involving in this area for such a long time. But how to integrate this with the NDC target is still a problem. So maybe in the future we will make more efforts and practice towards this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jing. And I'd like to know, Jelly, how you integrated the findings of the really good study that CEC published with the IGPN, on the topic, on the subject. And if, Jing, you can share in the chat box the link to your study for the other participants, and because it's recorded also, would be great. Thank you, Jing.
Yeah. Yes, thank you,
Over to
Farid.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, the IGPN have made the report, but was reviewed in our ministry.
Okay.
Maybe after that we will share the
Okay.
link to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I attended the webinar on the result of the survey. Actually, that was very helpful in terms of also identifying policies and frameworks. So that particular document was considered in this part in our ongoing research. So thank you for that initial assessment on the survey. So it was really very helpful.
And the question is, how can we make this concrete? You know, this
Yes,
integration.
actually, this is one of the last chapter of this particular paper that we are working on, is highlighting the gap of the UNFCCC monitoring indicators, because our initial assessment is that the questionnaire itself, the indicator itself would not really lead for the reporting agencies to even think of the strategic role of public procurement. So we have some recommendations on the UNFCCC itself on how, to make sure that a specific sub-indicator on their questionnaire right now, because they have, a questionnaire on how governments should report their NDC. And one of the recommendations that we're finalizing right now is to make sure that the UNFCCC ways of asking reporting would be leading towards the government recognizing the important role of public procurement. So that is one of the recommendations.
Do you expect the proportion of countries that integrate public procurement in their NDCs to rise in the coming years?
If sometimes you have to design the system by way you are asking the question. So if the questionnaire per se, because in terms of reporting, they are following a certain questionnaire. And if you look at the questionnaire, that's why only 10%, not that much, because the concept of sustainable consumption and production, at least on that particular side, should be highlighted so that, and then the role of government on that SDG 12 should be very, very important in terms of 13. The direct relationship between SDG 12 and SDG 13 should be one of our recommendations.
Do you think the way the questionnaire is framed can help or can lead or can motivate countries to integrate public procurement, or at least to disclose what they're doing in this area?
Yes, because there are some countries that submitted the report just answering those questions. They didn't put it in a narrative. They just, answer the questions. They don't have a narrative. So imagine if you have sub indicator.
I see. Okay. Last opportunity for questions and clarifications before we close.
Yeah. Hi. This is
Vikram. Please, Vikram, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Preet. Hello, Dr. Molino. Thanks for a detailed presentation and a good analysis. My name is Vikram. I'm a SPP consultant with United Nations Environment Program India office. So I understand that you refer to World Bank Public Procurement Database to understand the documents that are available related to public procurement, environment, SPP. So I believe that the database is not that updated. There is just one policy related to public procurement at the state level. There are 4 other policies that were issued. So maybe if I can get your contact information, I can maybe share some of the information with you so that this study can become more up to date for India at least.
Please, I use that database as a starting point. And after that, I look at the website of the targeted countries. In fact, some of them are not in English. So I try to using Microsoft translation to translate some of the document, but only related to those already published in the database. This is not actually the database. When I check some of the World Bank colleagues, it's also a questionnaire, in a sense that that's why what it is verified. If you look at the database of the World Bank, even if the database did not include that they have sustainability provision in the public procurement law, but because I read the law, I translated those that are not in English. I was able to like put blue marking saying that yes, they didn't have the exact word, but they could be supported by other provisions. So, but please send me the documents. That's why these particulars mentioned in the initial, this what we're doing is part of our methodology. So if you have, I put in the chat my email address. Please, any data that you think could be impactful in making sure that this is more robust, please send it to me and I will definitely include them, because as far as I am concerned, I think I tried as much as possible to be exhaustive in this particular research. But of course, given that the limitation of the time, there might be some documents that are not online, publicly online. So please send it to me. That my email is in the chat, and I appreciate receiving it. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. We'll do that.
Yes, thank you, Jellie. One of the objectives of this webinar is to make sure that we get your feedback, that we are exhaustive, we are up to date. So please don't hesitate to send us any information or any corrections that you think we should introduce. We're still at the draft stage, and Jellie is still working on the study and making sure that we are very comprehensive and up to date. So without further ado, maybe. Yeah, thanks, Susan, for your comment. We're all looking forward to reading the report, to finalizing the report. So if there are no more questions, I will thank Dr. Molina. I think we can call you.
I have one request.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one request. Can we all put our web camera on? Can I have a screenshot of all of us here?
Yes, let's do that.
Please, please. If it's not too much to ask for internal reporting, not necessarily for publication.
Yes, thank you.
Just to see that I'm really talking to real people.
Okay, I think you can take a
Yeah,
screenshot.
I will do a screenshot. And let me see if I put it in a Word first to make sure that I will have it already. Wait.
Thanks, Jelly. I think we can call you doctor, right? Did you
Yes.
defend your dissertation on?
Yes,
Okay.
after 5 years. After 5 years, I am finally conferred by the University of Turin the degree of PhD in law institution.
Congratulations.
And I successfully defended my dissertation on the role of multilateral development banks in promoting sustainable public procurement towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's why anything about SDGs and public procurement, and now not necessarily MDBs, while working with UNEP, this is more on the role of international organizations, regardless of the nature.
Thanks, Jelly. So I'm going to thank all the attendees for their participation. And, as we said, we look forward to receiving the final version and to meeting you again in a webinar, a presentation webinar in January. Okay, before that, I wish you all a very happy end of year holidays, and looking forward to meeting you in 2023. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.